好了，我们现在进入第8段。在这个节的讲座里边，哈森教授讨论的是人类文明与债务赦免的问题。他说呢，其实人类的大部分不同文明的阶段呢，都有这个债务赦免的问题，但只有西方文明是债权寡头的政治制度，而其他的文明呢，可能更多的关心的是公共增长，关心的是社会发展，关心的是这个社会发展可能也有债务产生，但是往往呢是在一定的阶段上会有债务赦免。那西方文明呢，则是掠夺及垄断，所以它变成债权寡头政治。
Well, actually, it was my balance of payments analysis of Argentina, Chile, and Brazil at Chase that did lead to most of my subsequent analysis. I could tell then that Latin America couldn't pay its debts and that there was a debt problem. It led me to realize that the International Monetary Fund was using its inability to pay as a means of taking over its government. So that became led me to ultimately write Super Imperialism in 1972. But also, after I left Wall Street, I became the economist for the United Nations Institute of Training and Research for a number of years. And my field there was basically North-South relations. In other words, the Southern Hemisphere, debtor Southern Hemisphere and the creditor Northern Hemisphere. And I did 3 reports and 3 books showing that in the 70s, showing that Latin America could not pay its foreign debts. Well, there was a meeting in Mexico that was funded by the Mexican president to discuss this. And at the meeting, I made that point, and there was literally a physical riot. And people were Americans were being beaten up, thinking one of them was me. I wasn't beaten up. Some of my friends were in Mexico, and I stayed with them. But I realized that it is really an important issue, the ability to pay, and what happened, how countries through the ages handled the ability to not pay. I was urging a debt cancellation, and especially the left wing didn't want it. The Institute of Policy Studies said you can't cancel a debt, cancel the debts. People will think you're crazy. And I said, well, they can't be paid. So the question is, how are they not going to be paid? If you don't pay them, you're going to have austerity. So that was in 1979, I think that meeting was. And so I began to write a history of a debt. And it took me about a year to get through Europe and Greece and Rome. And all the debt revolts in Rome. And I kept seeing scattered references to the Near East and debt cancellations and clean slates, but they were all scattered. And so I began to study it. And as I talked to people who could read cuneiform and read the Near Eastern Assyrian and Sumerian documents, there was a disagreement. They said, well, they couldn't really have canceled the debts. It was all ideology. It was an ideal. They were utopians. It didn't really occur. And other people said, wait a minute, of course it occurred. We have the lawsuits over it. We have all of the actual discussions of this by not only Sumerians and Babylonians, but by Egyptians. And so I decided I want to, I wrote a draft history of the origins of debt. And friends of mine brought me up to Harvard, where I talked to the head of the anthropology department, which was also the archaeology department there. And he said, look, nobody's going to believe it if you say it, because you're an economic PhD. We need a Syriologist to say it. So here's what we're going to do. Let's organize a series of 3 conferences. And you're going to have, you've said so much. You've talked about debt. You've talked about land ownership. You've talked about the relation of the private sector to the public sector. Let's have 3 conferences, and we'll invite the leading specialists in every field. 3rd millennium Sumer, 2nd millennium Babylonia, 1st millennium Babylonia, Egypt, even Rome. And we'll have each of the specialists say everything that they know about the existing documentation about the royal proclamations concerning debt and about the private records about debt. So we began to organize them in 1994, and we ended up making 5 colloquia on writing essentially the origins of economic history of the Western world. And the origins of the Western world were in the Near East. They weren't Western at all. And what we found was that classical Greece and Rome, the West, broke off from the Near East, and what made them different was that they didn't have central rulers empowered to cancel the debts. From the very beginning, Greece and Rome were run by the financial landowning class that always was an oligarchy. And even Aristotle said that many countries whose constitutions claimed to be democracies are actually oligarchies. So I saw the difference between Western civilization, the breakaway from Near Eastern and other civilization, was this breakaway of a financial, private landowning, absentee landowning sector. And Western civilization is still suffering from the way in which Greece and Rome broke away from the ancient Near East. And as I mentioned in my lecture today, it was not democracy that led to canceling the debts and redistributing the land. It was the Greek tyrants, reformers, overthrew the mafia-type states of Greece in the 8th and the 7th and the 6th centuries BC, overthrew them and laid the groundwork for what became democracy, but always a democracy with private land ownership and private credit. It was basically the Greek tyrant reformers, and in Rome there were the kings that, according to Roman historians, kept the oligarchy in place, and the kings were mostly appointed from outside of Rome so that they would not take the side of existing Roman oligarchs and creditors and landowners. And Western history became a creditor-oriented history as opposed to the rest of the world, where they always put the public growth first and the consolidation of the population and mutual aid first. Islam, early on, Asia always had a mutual aid ethic so that they could grow together. Of course they had wealthy families. Of course they had wealth, but the idea was to steer wealth in a way that would benefit the entire society. So that this was proto-socialism. You didn't have any proto-socialism in the West. The West was founded as an antithesis to the public sector domination that you had in Greece and in Rome, that you had in the Near East, and which continued in the Byzantine Empire. And my book on Forgive Them Their Debts is a whole history of debt cancellation in the Near East and how this was continued in the Byzantine Empire in the 9th and 10th centuries until the emperors were overthrown by the domestic oligarchy. We discussed that, I think, in the first lecture. So that you could look at Western civilization from the very beginning as being the expression of a creditor oligarchy wanting to take over the land and extract the land rent and the natural resource rent and monopoly rent from countries that it conquers. That's been the policy of Western civilization for 2,000 years, and it's that policy that has to be ended in order to save the rest of the world from being absorbed by this American finance capitalism, in the sense that the ancient world was devastated and pushed into a dark age by Roman imperialism. So all that came from my original analysis, that was that you have to cancel the debts or your economy is going to polarize and being impoverished. That's the business plan of the banking system. The business plan of Western banks is to impoverish, first of all, foreign populations, and then to impoverish the domestic population. That's the business plan of finance capitalism. And it destroys its own, that's the inner contradiction of finance capitalism. It destroys itself if it doesn't have a socialist revolution to turn finance into a public utility, to finance industrial capital formation, to finance infrastructure, to finance economic growth instead of predatory rent extraction. But all these are jargon terms, and so I wanted to describe the phenomenon of asset stripping before I get into explaining the jargon of what does economic rent mean, what is rent extraction, what is a rentier economy. But it's good we can sort of tell the audience where we're going in the future lectures. Well, history is not taught in America anymore. Certainly it's not taught as part of the social science curriculum. One of the American military people said, we make our own history. He said, history doesn't matter. We make our own world, our own history. That if you study history, then you realize that we're going downhill. And no country, if the purpose of education is to support the status quo, then you don't support the status quo is saying, wait, it's making us all poor. You don't support the status, if the status quo is exploitative, is making the economy poor, and if free markets mean central planning and dictatorship is opposed to government, then you don't teach that because that's a critique of the status quo. And if universities' role is that of churches used to be, to support the vested interest in the status quo, you're going to have to make up a history. And so essentially what you get in economic theory, you don't get economic history. You don't even get the history of economic thought. You get, here's what history would be if our wealthy people actually wanted to make the economy richer, and if cutting taxes on the rich was a good idea, and letting banking and public utilities be privatized actually was a good idea. Here is how history would have evolved, and here's where it would be leading. And so the pretense is that there wasn't any state, that money wasn't created by palaces and temples, although it was the temples that made all the money and the palace that created the prey system. They said, no, it was only individual merchants bartering. It's the free market. They act as if history was created as a free market, when it was a free market that destroyed history, a free market that brought on the Dark Age. You don't want to say that the vested interest in the economic system you have today is bringing you in a dark age of poverty, of depopulation, of making the whole financialized world look like Greece and Argentina and Latvia or Russia under Yeltsin. You want to say, oh, this is a success story. It's all moving forward to and our economy is actually growing. And how do we know it's growing? Look at how many more billionaires there are every year. If you define growth as the amount of billionaires, then we're growing. And if you don't look at how the billionaires are getting rich off by not letting the 99% grow, by concentrating all the wealth in their own hand, not spreading it around, then they're going to be growing. So it's all not only education, but the newspapers and publishing and the mass media and the academic journals have all been a celebration of the status quo, meaning praise of the financial sector. So that where I taught at the University of Missouri at Kansas City, we found none of our professors could get our articles published in the respectable media that were all controlled and censored by the University of Chicago and free market economists, because we're not talking about the free market. So, and our students, our graduates, couldn't get prestige jobs anywhere. So essentially, the Americans only get one side of history, and they literally grow up ignorant. And that's what foreign countries realize. Unfortunately, Russians didn't study American history. They studied the theory of communism, but they didn't study the practice of American capitalism. So they were unprepared to cope with the American neoliberal advisors who came in 1991 and told them, here's how you get rich. They actually thought that the advisors were telling them how America got rich. And America got rich by sending neoliberal advisors to Russia to impoverish it and making it poor. They didn't get that it was all a profit and rent extraction financial system. So where are you going to learn finance? It's not going to be in American universities. So we get back to what I was saying in the first lecture. Why does China send its students to America to learn how capitalism works? I mean, I was able to find out as a bank research worker, but they don't have research economists anymore. So I don't know where you're going to find out. They're aware that their money comes from saying what the Chicago School is saying. They're aware that if they say anything against free markets, they won't get tenure. They're aware that their job and their money comes from saying finance is good, billionaires are good, rent seeking is good, governments are bad. They're aware that that's what pays them. That's all that they're aware of, and that's all they care about. They don't, and they know that if they explain the system that is making them rich, how it works, that they won't be part of the system anymore. So where is there going to be a university that does have all of these ideas? I guess that's what Kinshi's trying to do with the group that she's organized. She's trying to spread these ideas so that somewhere there's a seed of recovery of history.
那在这一点上呢，这个大家可能需要多一点历史知识。你们可能应该了解，中国这个早期的国家形态是产生于因农业社会依水而居，并且形成聚落而居，就是依水。咱们这个国家很有意思，中国是一个世界上最大的第三极，就是青藏高原隆起。它隆起之后呢，就带动周边大气向上顶推，到了高空变成遇冷降雨降雪，就把青藏高原变成了一个世界最大的湖泊群，也变成了世界最大的冰川群。它的那个作用有点像南极北极，我们正好是受益于三级台阶地理分布，一江春水向东流，10几条大江大河从青藏高原一路南下进入大海，那这就有了中国的所谓原始的农业生存方式。那这个早期的人类呢，就是沿着这个向东流的这个水沿水而居。那为什么要聚落呢？就是因为你既可以利用水来搞农业，又得防治水患。单家独户呢是不能生存的，于是说它变成一个聚落，就变成村落为主体的这样的下层社会的生存方式。那这个国家当时形成国家，就是因为大禹治水这个夏朝嘛，以水立国了嘛，就是因为治水而形成的国家叫以水立国。它就跟西方的这个长期生活在草原上采集狩猎那大家是带有一定的掠夺性，而互相之间当然是争夺了、抢了。于是呢，劫掠就是一种文化，逐渐演化成政治，这是两种不同的类型。那你因为你是要做各种各样的水利工程，你要有国家的这个社会建设，所以经常会有赈济或者建设等等这样的开支。所以呢，如何能够把这个开支合理化，于是说要建立国家的这个收支系统，比如财政会计等等这个规范制度等等就建立起来了。那这些呢，往往是不能形成高负债的那一旦发展到一定阶段，往往会均田免赋，或者是国家直接出手来干预那些豪强大族占田形成的对一般弱势群体的那个债权债务关系。所以你们可以看到很多这个所谓中兴的故事，都是那些中央王权如何去消灭那个豪强大族。那这因此呢，就等于平民弱势群体得到了再一次分配财产均田的条件。那均田同时呢免赋也免债，于是乎呢，这就等于是这些债务的赦免呢，在像中国这样的文明传承的国家里边，几千年来它都是经常发生的。而在西方的文明之中呢，它恐怕不是我们这种社会文明形态，也不是这种国家形态。所以呢，他认为这个西方文明是掠夺及垄断的。他这个作为西方中心主义的思想体系中的一个进步学者，他能够有如此强的批判精神，这个是值得我们大家高度关注的。 那到了金融资本主义阶段，当整个资本主义进步到从产业资本进步到金融资本阶段的时候，那金融资本主义是自毁性的，这跟上面阿明所提出的金融资本内爆理论实际上是一致的只不过他说叫自毁，阿明所叫做内爆。所以他说呢，在讲到这些的时候呢，我们需要重新学习历史，来理解文明，也才有文明的复兴。从这一点上来说呢，我觉得作为一个美国人，他至少把西方文明和东方文明这个哪一种文明相对而言可能具有更充分的复兴的条件，做了一个分析希望呢这些对于这个学习者们来说能够有所启迪。好了，我这个介绍就说到这儿，谢谢大家。